I'm Michael Pearson. This is The Human Condition. Our topic today is debilitating anxiety care, and we're going to unpack some concepts about what you can do for root causes. I want to be very careful with you and say that proper medical attention is required, and a person can be really quite debilitated and can be really in a danger zone where they need to talk to a professional. And so some people can do this themselves in a DIY fashion, and some people really can't. You have to some degree, let the buyer beware, as they say, caveat emptor. So you have to, know that some people can't really advocate for themselves and they can't take care of themselves, and they need to be, taken to a hospital or taken to some kind of mental health institution. Sometimes the police are called. And in fact, I want to just add that one of the things that even neurofeedback can do is it can lower the incidence of calling the police. This is reported in the Neurofeedback Advocacy Program's website by Matt Fleischman in his reporting section. He's got a reporting section where he works with dozens of agencies and tens of thousands of people around the world that have learned how to use infralow neurofeedback to deal with all kinds of different mental health challenges. But one of the things that they measured was the reduction in police calls and the reduction in emergency calls and the reduction for all kinds of purposes. And some of that is for anxiety. Not all of it's for anxiety, but some of it is for anxiety. So, what is anxiety? It's an over-revving of the frontal lobes. Generally, it's not clear whether it's the right or left frontal lobe. There was some scuttlebutt in the past about maybe depression was a dominance of one hemisphere and anxiety was a dominance of the other. And that was somewhat true for certain alpha waves, but you can't really treat it reliably. So sometimes anxiety is an over-revving of both frontal lobes with these beta waves that just blast a person with feeling like they just can't slow down. Other times it's fast alpha, which is the resting state of the brain is just a little too high. It's like, my first car was a Chevy, and it would run sometimes its own way. It would stop at a stop sign. You take your foot off the gas, and it wouldn't just idle. It would go brrr, and it would rev up real high by itself. And I had to learn how to fix that sometimes. And sometimes I was successful, and sometimes I wasn't. But that was back in the days, of carburetors and the first fuel injections in regular cars. So when we have patients that are dealing with problems, sometimes it's dietary, sometimes it's toxic, sometimes it's familial, sometimes it's all of the above, and very often there's a traumatic event that happened maybe in pre-childhood, in gestation, in the womb. There could have been a childhood event. So I'm not trying to minimize mental health talk therapy, and I'm not trying to minimize drug therapy. What I want to do is be a resource for all the other stuff, because nobody's doing that, right? I'm not nobody, but there isn't a large organized group presenting that for you. Now, it's really interesting to know, and I've said this in other of my videos, the Stanford clinics under Shabani Sethi are doing ketogenic interventions that are first line intervention for mental health problems, things like bipolar and things like schizophrenia. And there's a lot of similarities between anxiety and bipolar and schizophrenia in that there can be hyperactivation of certain brain waves and in certain places that are more frontal, and they can be complementary to get some kind of a diet that will calm the metabolism. What we want to talk about is a few more concepts today. And so some of the concepts that drive anxiety need to be mentioned, and they should be mentioned by the tradition of the orthomolecular psychiatrists who got really bashed, and unrightfully so. They were undeservedly bashed, but it started with Linus Pauling, who won a couple of Nobel Prizes in biochemistry, and he coined the term orthomolecular psychiatry, which was orthomolecular means the same molecule as in your body, not a drug, not an artificial molecule that's made and distorted from reality to be patented and never occurs in nature because it's man-made so that it can be patented, because it can't be prior art. It can't be prior art for patent law. So what Linus Pauling did led to Carl Pfeiffer, a series of authors like Abram Hoffer in Minnesota, and then ultimately William Walsh, and now Shabani Sethi and Brett Scher. All these different people have done this, and there's many, many more that have looked at this. Jack Kruse, looking at brain chemistry and mitochondria and low-carb animal-based diets and appropriate light and all those things to help with brain dysfunction. So there are several little categories that I want to talk about. The first one is called methylation. And methylation is this process of adding a CH3 molecule another molecule that's a nutrient. And that makes it more active. It makes it more able to cross membranes. It makes it more able to bond to other things. It makes it more reactive in the cellular spaces and the mitochondrial spaces. And it just allows it to be more reactive. It's almost like, getting it ready to act. So methylating something makes it do something. And so there's this balance between methylation and acetylation. And what you need to know is that in our genes, most of our genes are wrapped up and quiet. Your genes, if you remember genes are strands of DNA, and you've probably heard of them since the 1950s when Watson and Crick stole them from a lady that actually discovered them. And so these DNA strands are normally, when they open up, they express a particular strand of code, and that code is read by some kind of RNA. And the different molecules read that DNA. They go through two processes where they read it and then they make new proteins out of it. And that's how you repair all your cells. And that's how you do your jobs of what you're supposed to do in your cells. So each organ is only supposed to have a little bit of your DNA open for reading. So like your brain cells are only supposed to have the section for brain cells open, not the section for making shin bone, and not the section for making hair. You don't want those sections open because it's a brain cell. If it's a liver cell, you want the sections open for a lot of chemistry because the liver does a lot of things, but you want certain things open and you want the rest of the instruction book to be closed. So when we understand that methylation, the process of methylation is what suppresses genes and keeps them all wrapped up and closed up. You can think of the strand of DNA as this long strand, this long chain. And when it's wrapped up and closed around a tennis ball, think of it as a tennis ball. These are called histones. This is all microscopic inside your cells. When it's wrapped up and closed, and the book is mostly closed, and there's only one page open that tells that cell what to do, and all the rest are closed, you're in good shape. And so if you're undermethylated, you don't have enough methyl groups to keep your histones closed. So your DNA gets opened, and your cells start reading all these different instructions. And here's the rub. Humans and lots of other animals have lots and lots of oncogenes, which are cancerous genes and other kinds of weird genes and crazy instructions for all kinds of weird, not good stuff in our genes. We have a lot of extra information and extra code that's corrupted, or I don't know if it's corrupted. It's just dangerous, and we don't want it open at the wrong time. We don't really understand it. It has to do with what's called introns and exons, which are the readable parts, and the parts that we call gibberish. We don't really understand what they are. 97% of DNA is introns, which means we don't know what it means. So when doctors are talking about genes and how we know what genes do, they're talking about the 3% exons that are written code for what we know, like making fingernails, or making hair, or making dopamine. And we know what those are, but we don't know what 97% of it is. And they act like they know. And they do this thing with, they use all kinds of clipping genes and enzymes. You've heard of all this stuff now where they're talking about, very specifically clipping genes. They used to just shoot them with a shotgun and try to blast the genes into food and do GMO that way. And now they use GMO with CRISPR, which is a system that is a lot more precise, and it cuts genes and splices them together like you used to do with old film or with old tape when you were doing audio tape, or if you're messing with videotape or film like editors used to do on the copy room floor. They would cut this tape and they would cut the video and they would splice it together. And that's how they would add special effects, or they would cut away and edit things by literally cutting the stream of images on a movie. Your DNA is the same way. So if we don't have enough methylation and a lot of people are undermethylated, you can't keep your genetic book closed, and you can't keep the dangerous instructions that we have closed and they're open. And so then your body kind of goes, oh, I'm going to read that, and I'm going to make cancer, and I'm going to make this, and I'm going to make that, and I'm going to make these weird cells, and I'm going to make dysplasia, and I'm going to make dysplastic cervix cells, and I'm going to make dysplastic skin cells, and I'm going to make all kinds of weird stuff that's pre and post cancerous, and all kinds of problems can happen. I'm going to make inflammatory molecules. I'm going to make all kinds of stuff that I shouldn't be making in places I shouldn't be making it. So if you have a methylation problem, which largely comes from high carbohydrate diets, you will have these problems, and you'll have things like anxiety. So just realize that one of the best ways to cure, or not cure, but reverse an undermethylation state is to go on a keto or carnivore diet and reduce carbohydrates and reduce processed foods. So you don't have to be animal-based. You can eat plants, but you're going to want to go less processed plants. And you're going to want to go with more whole foods that are organic or sustainably raised, even if it isn't organic. There's a big brouhaha about what is organic these days, and it's captured by industry. So organic may not be what it used to be or ever was. So that's the thing. Undermethylation, overmethylation, and the balance of those can be tested in the blood by something called the SAM-SA ratio, which measures S-acetylmethionine to SAH. And so you measure those two things and you come up with a ratio and find out where you are. In the old days, we used to do whole blood histamine. And this is the work of William Walsh. This is the work of the walshinstitute.org. Please go there and look at their stuff. You'll see many universities have this work, and it's been written about by a ton of people. Get books by Abram Hoffer, please, and read this stuff. So that's the histone binding model. And when you get those DNA can be shut back up again, your body goes back to normal in a lot of cases, and anxiety can reduce. There's a small number of people, around 8%, that get overmethylation of the methylation problem patients, and they have some problems with neurotransmitters, and they're treated a little differently because they have the opposite problem. They have overmethylation, and we treat that differently, and Walsh has a whole program for that, which I'm not going to go through today. So there is another difficulty that was a big deal that was talked about with regard to anxiety, and that was the zinc-copper balance. So we measure plasma zinc and serum copper and ceruloplasmin, which is a carrier of copper, and that helps with the balance of zinc and copper. It's not perfectly accurate. Some people do red blood cell zinc and red blood cell copper and magnesium. A lot of people do questionnaires to question zinc high and low levels and copper high and low levels. You can get those from the walshinstitute.org. And then there's metallothionein, which is a molecule called metallothionein 3, which is in humans and highly studied in horses and other animals. It's a protein produced by every cell in your body, but it's mostly in the liver, and it circulates and it carries things like iron and zinc and copper, and it can be really destroyed by glyphosate. So please understand that this carrier molecule called metallothionein, thionine means it's a sulfur-containing carrier, and metallo means it carries metals. So it's a sulfur-containing molecule that grabs metals like copper and like magnesium and like iron. And so some people have mysterious anemias, some people have mysterious deficiencies of minerals, and some people have really strange behavior problems like ADHD and anxiety that may or may not be related to their zinc or copper levels, because glyphosate is a chelator. It binds and steals your copper at like 1,000,000 times normal. And so you might have difficulties with copper deficiencies or other types of problems. And some people have copper excess too, and that can lead to violent behavior and other types of problems that can be balanced fairly easily if you can check for Wilson's disease and you can check for other types of problems. There's another phenomenon called cryptopyrroluria, and this is the old name for it. It's a pyrrole disease, which is a pyrroluria, which is one of a class of diseases that are where molecules that are supposed to be red blood cell and hemoglobin get hijacked because of a genetic problem that's triggered by stress. And you can't use or absorb or apply zinc and B6 very well. And so you end up having a high circulating amount of cryptopyrroles in your body, which is detected in the urine. And it's a very difficult technical lab to do. And so you need a lab that's very skilled. There are a number of labs that do cryptopyrroles poorly. And that's because they need to very quickly ship the urine to the lab. It's not a blood test, it's a urine test. And so you need to use things like DHA Laboratory is one of them that are really good. And there's a few others, but you can again find that on the William Walsh courses. Doctors can take those courses and they can learn about that. You can buy books. You can buy Nutrient Power by William Walsh, which is a very good, simple, small book. It's right over there. And I use it all the time. It's a great starting place for lay people and mental health providers that are not used to biochemistry. It's really simple to read and really fun. And it explains all these different things, and it breaks down anxiety into different phenotypes of different biochemistry types. There's another book called 7 Weeks to Sobriety that you may have heard me talk about, which is written by Joan Matthews Larson, another biochemist, much like William Walsh. She located in Minneapolis. She lost a son to addiction at an early age and started a massive clinic that I was near for years in Minneapolis, just right around the corner in the same building. And so that's an important thing. Another one is trauma. You need to study Siegfried Othmer and Sue Othmer, who died just 2 years ago now, and they developed the Othmer method of neurofeedback and infralow neurofeedback. Very neat method. There's other types of low frequency neurofeedback. You can explore all of them, but I think you'll find that there's a lot of research on this that's published quite a bit, and it has to do with early childhood trauma, and it has to do with emotional trauma, PTSD. It has to do with developmental disorders, developmental neglect and abuse. It may be physical, sexual, it may be emotional, it may be food, it may be, all manner and form of environmental and emotional trauma that a person may have, that it has to do with dysregulation and the relationship of how the right hemisphere and left hemisphere work together, and how the front and back of the brain work together to regulate at a very, very low frequency those astrocytes, which are the cells that glue everything together, the glial cells, and they are revolutionary in helping the brain, because we have 10 times more astrocytes or glial cells in our brain than we do nerve cells. And when you do traditional neurofeedback, you're only working on the nerve cells, the neurons, 1/10 of the cells in the brain. Whereas when you do infralow neurofeedback, you're activating a lot more glial cells, like microglial cells and like astrocytes, and these are cells that can be affected by these very, very, very low frequencies that are far below 1 hertz. They're extreme low frequencies, like submarines may use, and covert communications, and in the oceans and under the water. You'll also see this used by whales. Very, very low frequency communication. And we can use it. I've got a machine right over there. It's a machine that does that work. It senses those waves, and it feeds back into a computer, so that you get a reflection of your brain, and your brain learns how to regulate itself. And there's massive amounts of research on this, on the Neurofeedback Advocacy Project, which is Matt Fleischman's work, and some others that are really, really good. A lot of people have put a lot of work into this. Roxana Sasu put her work into this as well. Extremely important work. And there's more people. Sue Othmer, now deceased. Just wonderful stuff. And then, of course, the original work, with her and Siegfried. To explain this infralow neurofeedback and how it's different than regular neurofeedback, uses operant conditioning to stimulate you, to reward you, to make a certain kind of brainwave. And infralow is more like when you put a stethoscope on. When you put a stethoscope on your head, in fact, let me do that. When you do infralow neurofeedback, and you're trying to do a little different kind of neurofeedback, it's a lot like using a cardio stethoscope. This is a cardiac stethoscope that a cardiologist might use, and these are over $100, and they're not like the ones that your nurse might use for $8 or $12. And there's some differences in how they're constructed. And they're constructed with different tubes inside tubes. They're shorter. They've got different earpieces and all of that, and different drums and membranes and diaphragms. And so when you put that in your ears and you listen to your own heart, you get feedback. And so what you're doing is a couple of things. Number one, you're hearing with your sensory information your heartbeats. And so that's a lot like neurofeedback for your brain, only it's for your heart. And you're also eliminating noise with the earpieces. The earpieces shut out noise, so you can't hear anything else except your heart valves. So this is very similar to what you're doing with neurofeedback when you've got electrodes on your head, and it's infralow neurofeedback, and you're getting feedback from the computer that shows the field is changing, the sky is changing colors, there's animals that are moving at different speeds, the clouds are moving, the leaves are waving, you're going up and down, and as all those different pieces feed back different aspects of your brain waves, the amplitude, the wavelength, the frequency, the interactions between how yoked together different brain waves are, or how different they are, which is called phase lock and coherence. As all that stuff is being reflected back to you, it's really just like listening to your own heart with the cardiac stethoscope. You've got a system that shuts out noise and allows the signal to noise ratio to work. And you've got this amplifier to allow you to amplify the sound so that you can understand what your brain is doing, just like that happens when you listen to your heart. And your brain naturally regulates itself when it sees itself. When it gets feedback that says, oh, that's what I'm doing, it regulates itself. And that usually happens in about 20 sessions. So consider going to eeginfo.com, which is the website for those guys, as well as the Neurofeedback Advocacy Project with Matt Fleischman, and look at the results page and look to see what they've done with all kinds of stuff, not just anxiety. So I'm hoping that if you've learned about EEG brainwaves, if you learned about ERP brainwaves, which are passive and active brainwave measurements, if you've learned about laboratory tests you can do and ways you can measure and take care of yourself using keto and carnivore diets, detoxifications, elimination diets, and of course counseling, and of course medication, and even sometimes transcranial magnetic stim, sometimes electroconvulsive therapy where they zap the temples usually or other parts of the brain with electricity to really deal with some of the worst cases where they can't get control of anything. There's lots of ways that panic disorder and catatonic schizophrenia and anxiety and all these different things are dealt with depending on the individual. And so please don't give up if you've got these problems. An integrated part of root cause analysis is what I'm advocating for. I'm not saying that this is your problem, but I'm saying that without investigating, without ruling these things out, we have a lot of this in our life. And a lot of people are walking around with these things that I talked about today. And so if you don't look for it and rule it out, how do you know if you don't have it? Because the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health, is based on a criteria of you've got this particular mental health problem. And if you meet the criteria, you qualify for the diagnosis. But for every single diagnosis in that book, it says, and the patient doesn't have an underlying organic brain dysfunction or some other reason. Like, for example, if they were anemic, if they had a bullet wound, if they were bleeding, if they had an active infection and a fever, if they had encephalitis, you couldn't diagnose them with anxiety or depression when they have that other physical problem, which manifests as organic brain dysfunction. And I'm extending this further and saying to you that organic brain dysfunction is also caused by black mold. It's also caused by oxidative stress. It's also caused by insulin resistance. It's also caused by copper zinc imbalance and undermethylation and overmethylation, and you can suffer from it. So please realize that as we wrap up here, the Walsh Institute is talking about looking at overactive brains, not just anxiety and not claiming anxiety, but more bipolar and borderline personality disorder and things that involve the brain overfiring. That would include what's called oxidative stress. This is called the NMDA receptors or the glutamate system, which is a stimulatory system. And so the ways that we calm that are giving magnesium, giving N-acetylcysteine, giving superoxide dismutase stimulators and foods and herbs and vitamins, using elimination diets, getting rid of MSG, getting rid of artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives and dyes and petroleum and coal tar dye problems and stuff like that. I have some websites for you as well that we'll show in the section below so you can see those websites for resources. Thank you.